Legibility and readability. Legibility, if you think about legibility and letters, readability and reading. Legibility refers to how do we understand the objects as letter forms? How easy do we understand that the letter L is a letter L, or is it a lowercase, is a lowercase L an L, or is a lowercase L a capital I? That's legibility. Can we recognize the shape of that letter form as what it is as a letter form? So it's like having somebody, when you write your signature, it may look like a bunch of scribbles and it's words, but you don't know what words they are because it's a scribble. So legibility has to do with, can you discern what the actual letters say? Readability is the ability to actually progress through a written article in a pleasing, easy, comfortable manner. And readability, there's a lot of design decisions we make to make text more readable, whether we change the way that we justify it, whether we change the way that we justify meaning alignment, whether we change the font, the leading, the point size. There's a lot of factors that affect readability that are separate from legibility. So what I'm going to review today is, I'm not going to review this whole PDF download because there's like 9 pages to it, and I really want you to absorb it. But what I am going to do is I'm going to pull up a document and I'm going to talk about some of the principles that are addressed in this PDF, particularly legibility and readability. So again, legibility, can you discern a capital I from a lowercase l? If you change your font, it's a little easier to understand that that's an I and that's an L. But sometimes the font design itself precludes that. You're not able to discern that. And so as the designer, it's your responsibility, depending on the content that you're working with, and your book cover is a really good example. If you're choosing a font that you cannot discern letter forms very easily from each other, maybe it's time to choose a different typeface to make sure that your message is being received. Other things that affect readability are, of course, the type style that you choose, whether it's italic, bold, all caps. Some of you, you had set your text for your book cover in upper and lower case, and it's an action adventure, and it doesn't fit the personality. An action adventure is rarely set in upper and lowercase text because it looks too informal. It doesn't look threatening. It doesn't look suspenseful enough. It doesn't look commanding or demanding enough. It feels more like a kid's book or an educational book, like the personality is off. So even the aesthetics can change depending on the case and the type style that you choose. Other things that have influenced legibility is what color is your background and what is the weight of your typeface against that background. I saw some book covers where I couldn't read the text. I still see book covers that I can't read the words. Of course I know, of course I can see the words. But if I put it on a shelf and I put it next to a book that is really well designed with bright type that pops off of the shelf, I'm going to be more attracted to a different cover than your cover. So legibility also has to do with how much contrast is there between the weight of your typeface and the color of your typeface against the color value or busyness of the background. That will have a lot to do with, does it pop? Does it read? Is it legible? And then again, depending on your point size, when you guys are looking at this on screen, you're probably seeing that when we're dealing with Bodoni, which is what we're seeing here, versus Rockwell, that Rockwell is much easier to read than Bodoni is because of the contrast of the serifs and stems, that this is more monoweight and this is more high contrast. And they're exactly the same point size. They're not different point sizes. So that will have a lot to do with it. So there's a lot of different principles that I'm going to ask you to review and refer to in here. And then the other thing that I want to address is readability. Now, besides being able to see that the objects you have on the page are letter forms, and then I can clearly read those letter forms, readability has to do with how quickly I can move from point A to point B and all the way down to Z in a comfortable, easy, seamless manner, that my eye flows without jarring or stopping or stuttering as I go through the passage. And there are just as many factors that affect readability as legibility, right? Typeface selection will have to do with readability, right? When I look at this text and it's very light, that's beautiful. But if I had a lot of type that was set in a paragraph in a very thin font, it would be very difficult. My eye would be very strained reading all of that text because it's so lightweight. And there's also things about many of us download free fonts, right? Because we can, there's thousands and thousands of fonts we can get out there in the world. But what happens is some of these typefaces are poorly drawn. And what I mean by drawn is the digital coding, the information in the file is poorly done, and it looks bad on screen. So your job as a graphic designer is to, number one, if you stick with the Adobe font folio, you're already in good shape. If you start downloading fonts from free sources, then you're running the risk of the quality of the typeface not being as good. And there are some qualities here that you can refer to in terms of what that means. Like what does a good quality font mean? And this is describing what that is. So the other thing, and this is what we're going to really drill on a little bit today as I pull up an InDesign document for you to look at, is the arrangement of your text in a paragraph column and how that affects legibility, both in size, alignment, column width, which is also called measure. So if we look at this text on the page, left align text is easier to read than right align text. And there's a reason for that. Because when text is aligned to the right side, every time I get to the end, I have to figure out where to start the next line. Of course, I know it's here, but it doesn't flow. My eye doesn't progress through the page or through the paragraph as quickly as it does on a flush left. When I get to an end of a line here, I know exactly where to go. It's called eye sweep. When your eye sweeps from one side of the page or one side of the column to the other side of the column. When we're working with right aligned text, it's more staggered, it's more stuttered than it would be if it was left or justified. Centered text is another situation. Centered text is great if you're writing poetry or you're putting a short headline or short caption. Centered text is great. But when we're working with long paragraphs of text, centered text is a poor decision to make. It's very taxing to the reader when they are trying to read the story or the paragraph. And then run around text, we know what this means. Basically means it's running around an object or a shape, which is, it's always great. And we have to be careful of how much of that we do, because that can also start to factor into looking too much like it's either right aligned or center stacked. We want to be careful on how much wrapping we do of text around an object. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to pull up an InDesign and a file, and I want to specifically talk about this concept here that's called measure. Measure is what we refer to as the width of a column. Okay, so it's also called line length or width or column width, and the size of that width, that column, can either hinder or help readability of text. If a column is too wide or if it is too narrow, our eye, as it scans across the column, gets very tired. If we have to jump to each line often, it gets tired because we have to almost take a breath every time we jump a line. Or if we have to go across a long page, a lengthy line, and we can't breathe until the end, it's also very tiring. So we're going to talk about that in some examples. and other factors that also affect readability, incurrence of letter spacing, tracking, leading, paragraph indentation, these kinds of things. Okay, so this PDF handout that I've got on screen, this will help you kind of, it dives in a little bit deeper than what I'm going to share today in our lecture, but it is definitely addressing the same topic. And I want to encourage you guys to all read this at the very bottom about spelling. The last thing that hinders readability is spelling. You can't always rely on a spell check because there are words in the English language that sound the same, that are spelt different, and are not misspelled, but could be the wrong word for the right message. So it says here, there are many words in the ghoulish language that have multi-pal links. That's not what that's supposed to say, right? But none of those are misspelled. But if you read it, you know that it's wrong. So your job as a graphic designer is to also proofread your work, not just for the misspellings, but is it truly, truly what you're intending to say in the language? I saw a lot of typos in the work that you're submitting for your assignments. And it's, as a college student, it's not acceptable at this point. So you need to correct this. You need to fix this in your work process so that doesn't happen, and you get in the practice of checking your work. All right, so the next thing I'm going to share is I am going to share an InDesign file. Actually, you're going to see a sneak peek. This is the typography layout that you will each be building next week. So you're getting a sneak peek of that, but that's not what I wanted to share today. What I want to share is I'm going to ask for a few participants in this exercise and ask you a few questions about the text you're seeing on screen. Okay, so let's start with, let's see who's here today. Let's see, Evelyn. Based on the two sections of text that you see here on screen, the top, and the bottom section of text, which of these two is easier to read? And you can unmute yourself to answer. Evelyn, are you with me? Evelyn?
Oh, yes.
Did you hear my question?
No, I'm like in a loud setting right now.
Okay. Between the two sections of text at the top and the bottom, which of the text blocks are easier to read? This one at the top or this one at the bottom?
The top.
The top is easier for you to read?
Yes.
Why is that?
Because it's sectioned like vertically, and reading from top to bottom is more like challenging to read since some words are cut off.
Okay. So, okay. You would rather read, measure is also called line length or column width. The ideal measure for a line of printed body text is usually around 60 to 70 characters per line, or 18 picas is wide. For digital environments, the ideal for body is, do you see what I'm doing? Like,
oh, yeah.
You're taking a breath each line versus measure is also called line length or column width. The ideal measure for a line of body text is around, like, the answer to this is the one at the bottom requires less stress on my eye. I don't have to read all the way across the page, particularly when it's in printed content. All right. So that's definitely one thing you want to consider. And one thing that you did say, which I think I like the answer to, is maybe that column width was maybe a little too short. And now look what happens when I change this to 2 columns instead of 3 columns. Now, which one is easier? Definitely the one on the bottom, right? Because I'm not so exhausted getting to the edge of the line all the way across the page. Da, 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 da. When we read novels, when we read books, right? When we're reading our favorite short story or book that is more of like a novel or a memoir or some kind of fictional story, if you look at the typesetting of a page, it goes from left to right for sure. But the point size of the type is very large. It's probably around 12, 13 point in that book. So if you counted the number of characters, you would see that the character count from the left side to the right side of that column is probably around 70 characters. Okay. And when we're dealing with something that's maybe like a magazine layout where the type is smaller and we get more columns on it, we can get more on a page, you'll see that it's better to work with columns. Okay, so a shorter measure. Let's do another exercise. All right, let's see. I can't see names in some of these. Who would like to take this next one on? Which is easier to read, the one on the left or the column on the right, and why? Anybody? Andre, what do you think? Column on the left or column on the right?
I like the column on the left because there's more spacing. And
When you say
because
spacing, what do you mean by spacing?
not the letting.
Very good, very good. Yes.
Yeah.
Letting is a major factor when we're dealing with readability. When text is very tight, it means that sometimes ascenders and descenders can actually crash into each other too. If I make this letting extremely tight, what's going to happen is some of the characters are going to crash into each other, and it's going to be very difficult for my eye to move that tiny bit to the next line, as opposed to the one on the left, where it's much more comfortable to move my eye from left side to right side because there's a little bit of a break. It's socially distanced, as you might say. But equally, if the letting is too far, now it's almost too much space and too much effort to get to the next line. So is there a magic answer? Is there a magic percentage? About 150% is a good start. If your letting is 10 point, or in this case, if my point size is 9 point, I want my letting to be probably around 14 or 15. And that will be pretty reasonable. Let me bring that back up to 15. That will be a nice, even, nice balance. Okay, this one's set at 10 points, so it's a little bit bigger. And I would probably go to 16 point on this. So again, if you worked with a percentage, I would say about 150%, 140 to 150%. Okay, let's deal with another challenge. Left or right? Actually, let me do it this way. I realize you can't see all of the text. Top right, top left, bottom right. Who wants to take this one? Which is easiest to read? Sue, you want to give it a shot? What do you think?
I think top left.
Top left is easiest to read?
Yes.
Yeah, I would agree that is very easy to read. I would also agree that the bottom right is pretty easy to read too. Okay. Now, what you're seeing here are 4 different typefaces, all set at the exact same point size and the exact same letting. Okay. Every single one of these is I brought this one down a little bit. Same point size, same letting. And the difference is actually with the serif font, which is Bodoni, you can get a little bit more in a column, more text in a column than you could with mono weight or mono spaced letters like Courier, right? Courier is like a typewriter. The width of every letter is identical to each other. So everything is monospaced, everything is mono designed, everything has the same visual space on for each character. So that becomes very taxing on the reader to review because we stop looking at the words as groupings and more as individual letters. Where with Bodoni, you can see that there's a little bit more groupings of the letters to individual words. Now, one disadvantage of Bodoni is, we talked about this again, where the serifs are very, very thin. And with thin serifs, when we set that text very small, those serifs also become very thin, and it makes it a little bit more difficult to read. If I were setting text in Bodoni, I would need to make it maybe just a little bit bigger in order to account for that type being so thin in its hairlines. Where if I look at other typefaces, and let's see, where's the bottom of this text box? There it is. When I look at two other typefaces, I'm looking at Adriana condensed here, which is sans serif, versus Helvetica, which is here in sans serif. Again, 9 point, this is actually 10 point. So the type on the left is actually a bigger point size than Helvetica on the right. But it doesn't look that way, does it? This is so much easier to read for a couple reasons. Condensed typefaces, when you set them, especially when you set the text justified, so it's flush right and flush left, look at all of the crazy rivers that run through text, right? This is a river. A river is all of that word spacing that makes type hard to read in large sections. You don't see any of that happening with Helvetica. Condensed typefaces, when you set them justified, like this one is, you'll see that happen a lot more often. So that's a big factor in setting your text, is making sure that you're choosing the right typeface at the right size with the right alignment. If I make this text flush left now, do you see that all those rivers went away? Right? All of those rivers, that's what they call that white space in between words like that. When I set it flush left, they're gone. It's still a little hard to read this text because the spacing between words is very tight. It's a condensed font. I wouldn't set too much type in a condensed font if it's body copy.